When you have a show about gratitude, you've got to be grateful for your sponsors. And in that life of gratitude, we all have guides. Somebody that guided us through our lives, that made us appreciate those things that we have. And that's why I'm so delighted and so grateful for our sponsor, Life Guides. Life Guides is a peer-to-peer community that helps people navigate through their day-to-day stressors by providing a place of empathy, listening, wisdom, and support with a guide who has walked in your shoes, experiencing the same challenge or life experience as you. A true life guide. And because you're listening to our gratitude podcast, if you go to their website, lifeguides.com/schedule a demo and add the code HEALTHY2021. The code is HEALTHY2021 in the free text box. You'll get 2 months of their services for free. 2 months for free. So sign up, show your team you care, get a life guide, be grateful for those guides in your life, as I am grateful for our sponsor, Life Guides. Hey, welcome to Leading with Gratitude Live. I'm your host, Chester Elton, the Apostle of Appreciation, coming to you from the Gratitude Epicenter of the Universe, Summit, New Jersey. We say, look, give us 30 minutes. We'll give you some great information, some inspiration, and some tools to help you lead a life of gratitude, not only at work, in your personal life as well. We're broadcasting on LinkedIn, Periscope, Facebook, and even Twitch, where we have one follower, by the way, who is my son. We're doing a special edition this evening. I want to introduce you a friend of mine. His name is Bob Glazier. He's the CEO of the Acceleration Partners. He's also an author of two of my, and I say this in all sincerity, two of my favorite books. So welcome to the broadcast, my friend, Bob Glazier, author, CEO, and just all-around good guy.
Hey, Chester. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too. Hey, listen, we're going to take questions. So as you guys tune in, tell us where you're from, where you're sitting, and put some questions in, because I know you're going to have questions for Bob on a myriad of subjects. But first and foremost, I want to tell you that Bob has written not just one, but two remarkable books. One that's kind of the umbrella, and then that one kind of feeds out of that. So I'm going to give you some time to introduce to us your two remarkable books and why you wrote them.
Yeah, well, I wrote the first one. It got rejected, so I wrote the second one, and then that went well. So then I, dug the first one out of the closet. But no, the story went. I went to a leadership program that really compelled me to make some changes in sort of my life and schedule and work. And one of those was changing my morning routine and trying to write something positive and read something positive and take some time for reflection. And some of the positive stuff that we were given as examples, I decry as it was a little rainbow and unicorny for me. So I wasn't doing it for me. So I decided I'd start writing a note to my team every Friday. I called it Friday Inspiration, trying to just come up with something about where they could improve or think about how to get better. It really wasn't about our business. Long story short, it ended up getting shared outside the company. I decided to share it with some, when I heard it was getting shared outside the company, I threw some friends on the list. They shared it some more. It kind of blew up and it was, tens of thousands of people within a year or so. So after a couple of years of writing these, and now people getting them all over the world, I had this idea to write this book called Friday Forward and share some of the best stories. So I enthusiastically took that to a bunch of agents who equally as enthusiastically told me that no one would be interested in that book because it was a compilation. It was my first book. And then I read my first, Rick Pascatullo, my first agent, and he said the same thing, but he said, look, I think there's a story behind these stories. Like, what is it? And I actually, for a year or two, then kind of sat down and looked at why did these stories cause people I didn't even know to change their life? What were we doing with our company to kind of build people's capacity? I didn't have the words. What had I done in my life? And what was I seeing about all these kind of high performers? And it was the same thing. It was these 4 themes of capacity building. So I really pulled out from the story those themes and wrote a book about capacity building, itself, and elevate, and the framework of that as a way to really kind of improve your life, improve your business, get more out of others. But I still love the stories. And while it brought in examples from the stories, once that book did really well, I went back to my publisher. I said, how about I tie the stories to the 4 elements of capacity building? And they said, we love it. So I went in the drawer, I took out the thing, dusted it off, and edited it, and here we are. So look at the little it's a little
I got my
translucent
copy
here.
too. Yeah.
So I like how they go together. Like, I think if you want to understand the sort of how capacity building works, but if you want to be inspired by the stories behind that, that's what Friday Forward is.
Yeah. I love LinkedIn Live. I love when we go live on YouTube and Facebook, because we get people from all over. We got Sharif from London and Walnut Creek, Lagos, Nigeria, Salt Lake City, Utah, Mobile, Alabama, Solomon from Papua New Guinea. I think that's a new one. Marion from the UK, and Adam Strong, a good friend of ours, been on his podcast, and Carmen from the Dominican Republic. It's always fun. Now, I've got my book, Elevate. This is the book you're talking about.
Yeah.
And I will tell our listeners, I bought like 5 copies of this and gave them to my kids. I loved it so much. He talks about capacity building spiritually, emotionally, physically, and intellectually. And what I love about your books is that they're compact. That you
I was going to say they're short. They don't require a lot of reading.
This isn't War and Peace. You know what I mean? I can read this. Well, like you said, the stories and Friday Forward, I got to tell you, some of the stories in here, and you've started to share some over your followers and whatnot, and they're quick. They're 2 to 3 pages. The one right near the beginning, of course, it was one of the first ones I read that I loved, was the story about A Beautiful Day. Yeah. Mike Serrani. And I love, he said he's my personal trainer and he's got a beautiful day tattooed inside his bicep. And I thought, he's not a YouTube fan. I know he's not a YouTube fan. and tell us just really quickly, because it's a beautiful story about his dad.
Yeah. So Mike, it's funny because you see, I'm like, he just doesn't seem like a YouTube fan. I don't take him for one. And so I asked him about it. And this, it's always a good question. And so what he said was, his actually his grandfather, I think, who had worked at this factory forever. It turned out there was a lot of asbestos there. He got cancer and had this terrible battle with cancer. And it wasn't actually until after he died that they found all of his journals. So talk about that morning routine, writing sort of legacy that he wrote in his family. And then just this huge gift of, he would sort of document his journey, and he would always, he was very positive about everything, a lot of gratitude. And he would always end it, no matter what happened, no matter what he was fighting or whether he was dealing with cancer, with beautiful day. And so that just became the gift to Mike's family, and kind of the anthem of their family was that this patriarch, he just, even he had a tough life and it didn't end well, but he always seemed to find that, it somehow was a beautiful day.
And I think that resonated with me on a couple of levels. One is clearly a life of gratitude.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, he was grateful for every day he had. The other is, I'm a huge journaler.
Yeah.
I've got like 40 of these journals, and, I put in photos of my family and how my days go, tickets to events, which when there used to be events that you could actually go to.
Yeah.
And so that journaling and that legacy, and then it would have such a profound impact on his son that he would actually tattoo it onto his body, I thought was a beautiful story.
Yeah, one of my mentors has always said his journals are really this library gift to his family, in the future, to understand his values and what he was thinking and otherwise. And yeah, they wouldn't have known about that at all, or the story behind it, had they not found those journals.
It's funny, we have my grandfather's journals, and back then the way you wrote said a lot about your education. That Spencerian script,
penmanship, yeah.
Right. And so
they don't teach cursive anymore. So
they don't. And I would look at his journals and go, I'm such a troglodyte. I look at them in my books. And it is interesting, because I've often thought, would my kids ever read my journals? And I don't think so. So what I've told them is, every now and again, I put money in them.
Yeah.
So the least you
every other page.
Yeah, is go through the page.
I'm not sure my kids could read my journals. My handwriting's so bad, it'd be like hieroglyphics. They would have to go to some translator for them. So listen, put your questions in the chat box. We've had a bunch more people join us from New Mexico and Nashville. Darren, good hockey in Nashville. Well, not this year, but we had hello from Mexico with Carlos, Oscar Barrera. You have a global audience.
Yeah. Sharif from London. It's really interesting to me as you compiled all these stories. And I know you're not supposed to have a favorite story.
Yeah.
Do you have a couple that when you put them into, oh yeah, this one has to go in the book?
Yeah, well, I have a couple. I have some sentimental ones. The one about my son and I going to the Super Bowl is just an incredible memory for me. But there's one that's sort of symbolic for me of the other ones, and that's I actually shared it over the weekend. That's the Ed Sheeran story, because I like the ones that sort of demystify the myth of the overnight success. I've had a bunch of different ones, and for me, that one really shows, like, look, Ed Sheeran, if any of you have followed him or heard him sing or play, I mean, he's just immensely talented, like raw talent.
Yeah.
And this guy failed and struggled for, 5 to 6 years to be discovered, slept on couches, made himself homeless, took a one-way ticket to LA. It's not, particularly in that, but it's just not talent that gets you through. He just had this commitment and perseverance. And the thing that a lot of people are marked on was like the advice that his dad gave him, which is the opposite, I think, of advice that most parents would give their kids, is like, don't have a plan B. He's like, Ed, if you want to be a successful musician, don't have a plan B, because you'll fall back on that. Like, this is your plan A. And, he had this naming sequence all sort of visualized out for his albums, and 3 out of the 4 of them they've had that naming sequence. And I love those stories where someone has it really planned out. And someone commented on the story I shared on LinkedIn this week, and then also said he had a speech impediment, actually.
Really?
He raps in a lot of his song when he was younger, and he used listening to Eminem rapping to like get over his speech impediment. I was wondering if that's why he does rapping at some songs. So this is like, it's not it. I think a lot of times we're told that myth of the overnight success, or like, oh, Chester just so lucky, and because it's just easier to subscribe success to luck than it is to like just perseverance and hard work.
Well, and I think often, people that are really successful, as they think they're being humble.
Yeah.
Well, I did work hard. I got lucky,
Yeah.
and they kind of push it off. I love, in your book, the Ed Sheeran quote, he says, success is the best revenge for anything.
Yeah.
My dad used to say that. He'd say, look, don't get upset, because the best revenge is to live well.
Yeah.
Live well. Well, it is really interesting. I tell you, there was another one that I loved.
I could probably try to see if I could guess based on the ones I know.
Okay, go ahead. What
I don't know. I'm trying. Well, let me look at the index. Let's see is it another gratitude one, or the other one that's really popular is one, World Class. That's probably been one of the most popular ones. But
tell me about World Class. I haven't read that one yet. Yeah.
So that's the story of Anne Mirabeau, who's one of the top venture capitalists in the U.S. Top female, one of the top overall. And she was a very shy kid, got into Yale, got an internship, like basically like doing clerical work in the dean's office. And just her dad would always say, like, do everything world class. And she was going to work, and she's like, Dad, it's a paper pushing job. And he's like, I don't know, do it first class. So she decided she's going to make great copies and buy great donuts. And she ended up giving a tour, being asked to give a tour one day to this important guy. She didn't know who he was, Lou. And it turned out to be Lou Platt, who was the CEO of HP. He invited her to come over break to HP, and really got her totally kind of inspired her onto a totally different path, and just came from making like great photocopies and having like immense pride in her work.
It's so funny. I did read that. For those of you that are going to buy the book, and I know that's all of you, it's on page 55, World Class. And and it's so interesting, because I read that story, and for the rest of the day, I took a little extra care in what I was doing. So I love that. Now, we've got a great question from a Marion Child, and it comes back to your book, Elevate.
Yeah.
Could you recap the 4 elements you mentioned and how they support you in your leadership role?
Sure. So the 4 elements, and they go in order. So they are spiritual, which is not religious capacity, intellectual, physical, and emotional. So spiritual is what you want, your core values, kind of core purpose, who you want most. So as a leader, I think it's very hard to be an authentic leader if you aren't actually clear about who you are and what you value. So that would really start there. Intellectual capacity is, for me, is like your operating system and your learning engine. It's sort of how you learn, plan, execute with discipline. Like, particularly if you're leading in a growing organization, like, you need to get better. You need to learn something you didn't know how to do yesterday, and sort of always be evolving. I don't know any great leaders that stay in place and are successful. Physical capacity is your health, sort of well-balanced, well-being, how you manage stress, kind of how you take care of your body and your person. And look, we all know, like, on those days when we're exhausted and we're stressed, we don't get enough sleep, like, we don't interact well with the world around us. We're not as great on our goals. We lose sight of the big picture. It sort of pulls all the other capacities down. And then the last one, which is often the hardest for people, is emotional capacity. And that's how you relate to the world around you, the things that you don't control, people, quality of relationships. So I think great leaders are really good about, look, and we're seeing the best and worst of this during COVID about, what do you control? What do you not control? And how do you lean into the right relationships? And how do you, frankly, move away from the wrong ones? There's a story in here called Energy Vampires from a great guy named Don DePane, who I've had on the podcast and on the show, and just the people in your life who just make you feel worse when you spend time with them, and how important it is to sort of move away from those people. Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. Sometimes, we need to help them out. We need to help them out. They'll just suck you dry,
Yeah. I had him on my launch event. He talked about there's some temporary energy vampires, right? So, Sheldon, Chester, if you have, something going on in your life or your family or otherwise, and you've had a bad couple weeks, right? But if you're just, every time I talk to you, I'm like, hey, Chester, how's it going? You're like, oh, well, this happened and that happened. Like, after a while, I don't want to ask anymore. Like, we all get a short-term reprieve, but I think his point is there's some people that just inherently, like this. I mean, I remember years ago, my wife had a friend that used to always call and be like, oh, hey, how are you? And like, well, then go into this all story. I was like, it was just a platitude. I
really didn't want to know.
I don't want to hear everything that's wrong. So it's funny.
And I think Courtney Bayless is our new favorite person. He said he just ordered 3 copies of your book. So there we go.
Great. So that's 10% on each one to Chester. So he thanks you for that.
That'll almost buy me a hot chocolate.
Yeah.
So it is really interesting. And I do love the way that you've broken it into those 4 categories as well. Right. And
I mean, I think, and if you've read Elevator, if you're really trying to think about, well, what do I want? It does help to read, well, what does it look like for other people? Or what are these, what do some of these stories look like? I think, again, some people like theory and some people like, reality.
Well, what I like about it is each story really kind of makes you want to do something a little different and a little better. Like after I read World Class, I thought, I need to take just a little more care in the emails I send out, my donuts, right? Yeah. I've got to take a little more care in prepping for a call. The other one that I was going to tell you about was a dad's influence.
Yeah.
I just love that. Ultimately he only cared if they were good people. It's interesting. I was talking to our friend Marshall Goldsmith today. He called me out of the blue, and I always love it when he does that. It's always quick and to the point. Yeah. He talked about an executive that he was coaching, and he said, I worked for 42 years really hard so that my kids wouldn't have to. Yeah, so I made all this money, and I gave him all this money, and he says, he made this investment, and he sort of expected a return, and what he was expecting was good kids, And he said,
well, that was entitled kids, I'm guessing.
Exactly. He says, I never had a great report. He says, in fact, my kids hate me, and I've given them all this money, and they're bums. And he said, it's really interesting that you can't get 42 years back.
Yeah.
Those relationships are probably permanently damaged. I mean, he might get lucky again with 1 or 2. And it's really interesting. He talks about instead of spending your time, invest your time instead of spending your wealth.
Yeah. And there's a great quote. Look, I wrote, I think in Elevate that I think this notion of actually wanting better for our kids has reached diminishing returns. I think that's a valiant thing. If you work in a mine or you work, 18 hours a day in a factory for minimum wage and you want out of that, but you don't want better for I don't want better for my kid. I have a great life. They don't need better, right? They need to figure out who they are, what they want to do, and how they can make their own impact on the world. Unfortunately, I think we have a little bit of, there's a great phrase I've heard where people there are really trying to prepare the world, the difference between preparing your kid for the path versus preparing the path for your kid. I think everyone else is trying to prepare the path for their kid rather than prepare your kid for the path. What is the wisdom, values, lessons you want to impart on them and let them live their life. And that example you said of trying to make it easier for them, then they have no gratitude, right? They don't know what it's like to struggle or need anything or want anything. And I've seen and heard that story way too many times.
Exactly. It's really interesting. Marshall wrote the foreword to our book, Leading with Gratitude.
Yeah.
And the thing that I've reflected on probably 1,000 times is he has a line where he says, the thing I've noticed, whether you're a janitor or a billionaire, we all want the same thing. We want to be happy.
Yeah.
And, sometimes, and you and I have had this experience, some of the happiest people we know are not the CEOs of multinational corporations, right?
No.
They're people that
you've heard that fishing story, the fishing boat parable. Yeah, right. But because I think there's this belief
tell
that
the story of the fishing boat, because you and I know it. Many of our listeners.
I'm gonna butcher it, but basically some investment banker is on a island, I think in Costa Rica or something, and he's talking to this local fisher guy who took him out for the day, and he's talking about asking about his business operation. He had like the best day fishing with him. He's like, well, I do this. And he said, well, if you got a second boat, you could then, have a guy do it and you could take the profits and you could, do this. Well, why would I do that? Because then you take the profits from that and then you get a third boat. And then soon you have a fleet and you have this. And every time he kept saying why. And eventually like it got to, so you could like have free time on a boat in Costa Rica. Right. And it just sort of, the whole thing had come full circle about, well, why would you go through the 30 years of doing all of that if you could just have that anyway? And I just think we've associated more that will make us happy. And there's a lot of data on this about there's a certain amount of money. It's like $78,000. And then above it, like there's just not more, it's just more money, more problems. And I know everyone says it and you say, well, that can't be true. But if you don't know what you want or what makes you happy, or you're not pursuing something that is fulfilling, then oftentimes, more money, more problems.
Yeah. It's really interesting. My dad, I remember when I was young, he said, we have a good life. He said, what's the difference between me and a millionaire? When a millionaire was a big deal, right? He said, so he can go out for a steak. He said, well, I can go out for a steak. No, I don't go out for a steak every day. He said, but I don't want to.
Yeah.
Who wants to eat steak every day? And then it was interesting. He there was this great old country song. And he said, after I've been eating steak for a long time, beans taste fine. Like the beans is good enough. I love this MF Tapia who's put on the banner there. Gratitude is the key of life. It's so important to remember that. And I just was so impressed that all these stories in Friday Forward are basically stories of gratitude. They're grateful for the struggle. They're grateful for their fathers. They're grateful for the people around them. They're grateful for the experiences they had. And, it's interesting. It's 52 weeks of inspirational stories. Although I have to confess, I don't read them once a week. I read them 2-3 times a week.
Repetition of these things is important. I mean, you see a great speaker, you realize you've been doing something, and then it gets you to double down again. I mean, some of these things you got to hear over and over again. And I think sometimes it's easier to reread stories than it is to reread kind of the same fact. And it's interesting. Again, you hear about all these books, Rejected or otherwise. Like I always felt, and look, some of these stories you can find them online, but they've been edited, they're organized. I do think people said, should I buy the digital or buy the hard copy? I'm like, look, you buy whatever. But the type of book this is kind of almost more like a journal. Like you're not necessarily going to read it cover to cover. Like you pick it up, you might make a note, you read in it. Like it's a different type of book. It's not necessarily designed to read cover to cover. If you were reading Elevate and you were saying, look, I'm really going to work this month on my intellectual capacity, you might just read those stories. So it's a little different, and I took a risk with it, but so far so good.
Yeah. Well, I think those are the books that are just great to put by your bedside.
Yeah.
Or the first thing you pick up in the morning. And like you say, that a great story, you can read it many times. And these stories are not, 50 pages long.
No, they're 5 minutes. If you get the new ones, you sign up for Friday Forward. They come 7 a.m. on a Friday morning. I envision people made a routine of just having their coffee and reading one on a Friday. Speaking of, I need to write this week, so I'm behind with the holiday. It screwed up my production by a day.
So talk about, though, you've got now not tens of thousands of subscribers, hundreds of thousands of subscribers.
Yeah, it creates a lot of pressure. It's good pressure. Pressure both not to quit and pressure to like write something that 200 and something thousand people will want to read each week. So I actually think like the whole process of it and the feedback and knowing how it's impacted a lot of people has raised the bar for me. And it's become this really important sort of keystone habit where, I'm going on 250 weeks now without missing one.
Well, here's the thing. If you hired another guy and you started another newsletter, you could take the money from that.
Right. And roll it out. But it really is the comments, it's the fact that actually someone will write me and saying this email made a huge difference for me this week. It had an impact. It's what I needed to hear. It helped me break through on something. Like that makes me motivated to go figure out something else compelling that I can write the next week.
Yeah. Yeah. And you have lots of contributors and whatnot. That's great. I just love the story.
I would say it's like Law and Order. I'm not going to run out of ideas because it's based on real world events, ripped from the headlines. Like there's plenty of stuff out there to pull into a story.
Law and Order. I love it.
Yeah.
NCIS. There's always another murder. Those guys, man, it's like a murder every week. What is with those guys?
Yeah. Law and Order, like 30 years of they never ran out of a thing because they just look at the newspaper and they build a story off of. Last night's was actually I was watching one 2 nights ago, some rerun, and it was they never take the actual story, but it was based on the Mets player who interfered with the ball. He was killed for a different reason, but they built it into the story of the fan, who interfered with a foul ball years ago, they assumed that he was driven out of town. They assumed that someone killed him for that reason, but it was totally for a different reason.
Yeah, when you said New York Mets, I thought, no, we haven't had a fly ball that important in a long time. So, no, I really do think it's wonderful the way it evolved and how you. Now, tell us a little bit. Now, first off, we've got FridayForward.com. You'd prefer people to go to, though, your main website, which is.
Yeah, that'll just take them to a sub-segment. If you go to robertglazer.com, you can sign up for Friday Forward. You can see the books, my Elevate podcast. It's all in one place. So, but if you want to go right to the Friday Forward page, you'll find it. It'll be one extra click if you go to robertglazer.com.
That's great. It's really interesting. We love to say, look, this is great information. Hopefully be inspired. I love, like I said, you read something, it causes you to look at maybe what you're doing a little differently. I would love, for example, for people to read Beautiful Day and say, I'm going to start keeping a journal because I want to leave something behind for my kids, or I'm going to take a little extra care. If you were to say 3 things about Friday Forward for people that are listening, 3 takeaways from your experience and around Elevate and Friday Forward, what might those 3 key takeaways be?
Yeah, let's see. You're talking about more like thematically, like the things that reoccur a lot?
Yeah, just the 3 tips for people to elevate their lives or be a little more inspired every Friday.
Yeah, so I think it's a little bit what you do is who you are, and I think someone said to me, if you want to change who you are, change what you're doing. I think a lot of times we're trying to do some radical makeover, some crash diet, or something that's not actually going to work. When there's little things in these stories where you can just do something a little bit better. Like you said, you read the world class and you're like, you know what, I'm going to write my email a little better this week or try to do it. I think that's a takeaway. And the whole aspect of capacity building, I think, is incremental improvement, right? Incremental improvement, you keep changing, you keep reorienting yourself, and then eventually it will sort of amount to something noticeable. But if you're looking for the change on day 1 or day 2, it's not going to be there. I think if you start changing the behavior. So I think that's one lesson. I think another huge lesson for me and just what this has been exercise in lifting up others and elevating others. Can I write something that helps someone else feel better or inspire them to share with someone else? Really easy to do that. Think about how much more energy it takes to go on social media, tear other people down, tell them their ideas are stupid, tell them they're wrong, tell them they're a moron. I mean, the amount of energy that people are using, particularly with the internet, to just tear people down these days is mind-boggling. And when we actually could be trying to lift everyone up. Someone just wrote to me that they had read the book and they decided to start something, even just to their team or a note or otherwise. I mean, that's sort of the momentum or movement that I would like to really start from this and have it sort of be the outcome of that. So I think those are a few of the key themes. And then the last one is if you read these stories, like I said, demystifying the overnight success or resilience, or one of my favorite podcasts is the How I Built This, because there's always these terrible, dark moments. It's not, I mean, my favorite, like Peloton, which is now worth $20 billion, the guy talks about how he would only go out to dinner for his wife for 6 months, talk about what they were going to do when Peloton went bankrupt and where they were going to live and how they were going to survive. And I think, again, we tend to look at others' success and be like, oh, that was just easy, and it's not. And I think in these stories, you'll see a lot of that hardship, a lot of that fighting through. We're in this now as a world, and I think sometimes you just got to get up and, put the pants on the next day and keep going.
Well, you know what? We're at our time. We promised 30 minutes. I'll tell you, his name is Bob Glazer. 2 great books, Elevate, Friday Forward. Order them online. They're audio, digital, hardcover. It's worth your time. I've known Bob for a while now. It's always inspiring to spend time with him. And by the way, anybody can just buy 1 copy. Follow our good friend Courtney. Buy 3. They make great gifts.
They are big gifts.
Anniversaries, it's all there. Well, listen, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. I'm going to put you in the green room for a second, and we'll catch up after we roll the tape.
Thank you, everyone. Good to see you.
I'm always grateful for our time together. We always say, give us 30 minutes. We'll give you great, information, inspiration, and a roadmap to a life of gratitude. I hope you'll follow us on LinkedIn. Sign up for our LinkedIn newsletter, the Gratitude Journal. Appropriate. We talked about journals today. And, on Thursday, we've got Clinton Sparks is going to be our guest on LinkedIn Live. Thursdays at 1:00. He's this incredible rapper, music guy. Again, not an overnight success. Great stories, great information for you. Just remember, as you go through all of this, and we're going through all this pandemic and everything, my hope is that people are just a little more grateful. Let's be grateful for what we have, not worry about what we don't have. Let's be a little more kind. Let's be a little more patient. And you know what? Let's be a little more forgiving. And I think if we can come out of the pandemic that way, then we'll all be a little better off. A life of gratitude isn't just a great way to lead your organizations. We've got all the data to prove that. It's just a great way to live. Grateful for your time. I hope to see you Thursday at 1:00. Don't forget, Elevate, Friday Forward. Go to your local bookstore or Amazon and buy them today. I'm out. Cheers.